Welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. Central Illinois has numerous referenda on the ballot March 20th, and for the next half hour we're going to take a look at 3 of those referenda. That includes a property tax increase request in Tazewell County, a question of whether to appoint or elect the auditor in Peoria County, and a tax increase in the city of Canton. We'll get to the latter 2 in just a moment. We're going to talk about Tazewell County first, but first I want to say hello to all of my friends at Mrs. Young's class at Keller School, fourth grade class at Keller, Mrs. Young's class. I want to say thank you for having invited me out there to read. It was about the King Oleomargarine was the name of the book, and it was really an interesting book, and we only got through 5 chapters, so invite me back and we'll do it all over again, okay? But on to more serious matters. I'd like to welcome to the program to discuss the Tazewell County property tax increase request, the chair of the county board, David Zimmerman. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into what the request is, where does Tazewell County find itself budget-wise right now?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag in that we're still solid financially. We have solid fund balances, and up until this point, our revenue lines have generally exceeded our expense revenue lines. But looking out into the future, we see that those 2 lines start to diverge with expenses outpacing our revenues.
So you right now have a property tax, the rate is the second lowest in the state of the 102 counties?
That is correct, and we're proud of that.
But you find yourself that you have to turn to the property tax to make ends meet with all the unfunded mandates, et cetera, that are coming down the pike?
That's a big part of the issue why we have to do this.
So you find yourself in a rather unique position in central Illinois in that you're a PTEL county. Can you explain that to our viewers?
So PTEL is like property tax extension limitation. Colloquially, it's known as tax caps. And what it is that each year we can't raise our tax rate greater than 5% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. And as most of us know, the rate of inflation has been very small. On top of that, we've not taken that increase that we could have for the last 15 years because, quite frankly, we didn't need it. And
so
now we do.
What's the increase you're asking for?
Well, we're going to go from 50 cents per $100 to 65 cents per $100. And even that 65 cents puts us at the 5th lowest in the state of Illinois out of 102. And we'll be proud of that rate also.
What does this resolve the problem in the next couple of years?
It helps us out tremendously. It buys us some more time. Whether this referendum passes or not, we'll still do a deep dive into our expenses. It will probably involve a reduction in force. Hopefully that will just happen with, as employees start to retire. We have a wonderful workforce, and we don't want to damage that if possible.
Now, this doesn't affect every homeowner in Tazewell County, does it?
That is correct. Tazewell County, the only county in the state of Illinois that's home rule is Cook County. So we're not a home rule county, but within Tazewell County you have Washington, Pekin, you have districts that overlap. So you have ICC, the Olympia School District in the southern part of the county that are not affected by this.
For our viewers, let's show you what the question is on the ballot March 20th when you go to the polls in Tazewell County. And you can see it there. And shall the limiting rate under the PTEL, the property tax extension limitation law, for Tazewell County be increased by an additional amount equal to, and it has some detailed numbers, above the limiting rate for the levy year 2016 and be equal to 0.64952% of the equalized value of the taxable property therein for levy years 2018 through 2021. This is not an easy thing to have on the ballot. People may not understand this. Can you explain in simple terms, well, first of all, why do you have to have this verbiage, and what does it really mean?
Well, it's statutory language that we can't mess with it at all. That's what the state mandates we use. And what that really means is that we're going to take the tax rate from 50 cents per $100 of assessed valuation up to 65 cents.
And about how much money does that mean to a homeowner, an average homeowner?
Well, I know the average home isn't $100,000. It may be, but if you live in a $100,000 home, you'll see an increase of about $50. And according to our assessor, a typical owner of a farmer, will see about a 2% aggregate increase in his tax bill.
This will increase it to 65 cents per $100 of EAV. Will you use all of the increase in the upcoming year?
Yes, yes.
And what kinds of projects do you need to dedicate that to, or is this just to make up a deficit?
Well, it's to make up a deficit, and we have some capital improvement needs. These are needs. These are not anything luxury. And those are things you can defer, but you can only defer for so long, and then you have to pay for those. So we have some money in it for that also.
For example?
Well, for example, you have a jail that's 24/7, 365, and it wears out a lot faster. You have issues like air conditioning and heating that we have to replace in a timely manner. Otherwise, we have to declare emergencies. We're not able to go out for bids, and so we end up paying more for those things. So this is actually a more wise and efficient use of those capital dollars.
What happens if the referendum fails and you don't get that tax increase?
Well, that's something that we've thought about. Either way, we'll probably see a reduction in force. Either way, we're going to dig into these numbers and try to find some efficiencies. But if it doesn't pass, I mean, obviously you look at the two biggest cost centers, roads and public safety, and those are the two departments where we'll see the biggest cuts. And that's just a decision. It's not a threat. I don't like to be blackmailed into that, but it's just the reality that when you don't have enough money, you have to look at where the money's going.
Might there be cuts even if it does pass?
Correct. I think there will be.
They just won't be as
Draconian.
deep and draconian,
Yes.
your term,
Yes, yes.
as if it doesn't pass.
Correct.
Are there other sources of income that you could turn to without this?
Well, Tim Newhouser, our finance chairman, excellent chairman. He's really exploring everything with Wendy Farrell, our administrator. We're looking at new grant opportunities. Other than this property tax increase, we may increase some fees, but those only bring in limited amounts of income, and there's only so many of those.
So the question before Tazewell County voters March 20th is, shall you raise the property tax rate from 50 cents per $100 assessed valuation to 65 cents? And that would mean about a $50 increase on a $100,000 home. David Zimmerman, Chair of the Tazewell County Board, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that item that's on the March 20th ballot.
Thank you, H.
And we'll be back with a question of the auditor in Peoria County in just a moment. And welcome back. This time we have with us a Peoria County Board member. Alan Mayer is with us, and he's going to be discussing the question of, shall the Peoria County Auditor be appointed or shall the Peoria County Auditor be elected? First, before we discuss that question, what does the auditor do?
Well, that's actually one of the issues up for debate, H. What we're talking about is making sure that if there's a yes on this so that we can have an appointed auditor, that this is someone who would be able to review internal finances, internal controls for the organization, make sure that we're not having waste, fraud, abuse, or inefficiencies in our organization. That's something that actually isn't in the county's code that an elected auditor would do.
So essentially review all the bills?
That's part of it, is a sort of comptrolling function, like the state comptroller reviews the bills that the governor's agencies spend. That would be part of it, but part of it is also going around and looking at the controls. Do you have two people signing checks? How do you make sure that someone isn't able to falsify a payment? Those sorts of controls, and making sure that in a $123 million budget that we don't have weaknesses where someone might commit theft or there might be inefficiencies or fraud. That would be part of the job of an appointed auditor.
Before we discuss the reasoning behind this referendum, let's take a look at the question that you'll face on March the 20th. It reads, shall the elected office of the Peoria County Auditor be eliminated effective December 1st, 2018, and replaced with a professional county auditor qualified and appointed by the county board with a 5-year term, during which such appointed county auditor can only be removed from office for malfeasance or official misconduct? So the question is relatively straightforward.
Yes.
But why a 5-year term?
So a 5-year term because the longest any county board member serves is a 4-year term. We want to insulate this auditing office as much as possible from everyone else to provide them independence. Basically, we need to have a professional, independent, and nonpartisan auditor for Peoria County.
Does this have anything to do with saving money?
This is not really about saving money in the auditor's office. I think at the longer view, it is about saving money in that having a professional internal audit function helps us identify areas where we're at risk or where there are inefficiencies that we can reduce and save taxpayers' dollars.
Right now, there are very minimal requirements if you run electively
Yes.
for office. You have to be a resident of Peoria County,
That's,
have to be an adult.
yep.
That's pretty much it.
And you have to get more votes than the other guy. That's about it.
So there's going to be more requirements?
Yes, so what we spell out is that you have to have the credentials that you'd expect a professional auditor to have, either being a CPA or a certified internal auditor or a certified government auditing professional, as well as having at least 5 years of experience in auditing, preferably in the government sector.
So there are other limitations here. For instance, the auditor, right now, when you run for office, you run as a Democrat or a Republican. I
Correct.
suppose you could run as an independent.
You could.
But the appointed, if this passes, the
Yes.
appointed auditor will be restricted in terms of political activities?
Absolutely. One of the things that we want to do is simply take politics out of this office. It's far too important to make sure that no one thinks there's a political or a partisan motive behind what an auditor is looking into and the reports that they make. The appointed auditor would not be able to run for political office, would not be able to be active in a political party. They would have to be a professional auditor. And part of what you have to ask yourself when you're getting ready to vote on this is, do you want an auditor who has to spend a large share of their time going and asking special interests for campaign contributions and going around campaigning, because that's what they are, they're a politician? Or would you rather have a professional who's back at the office doing auditing?
The opponents of this referendum say, shouldn't the voters have the final say on who the auditor should be?
Well, and I think that we can disagree about what the best way to guarantee independence of the office is. But if we stick with the current system, as you already mentioned, H, we really have no guarantee that we get someone who knows how to conduct a professional audit, someone who will actually be fair for Democrats and Republicans in the organization. I think that creating an office that's professional, that guarantees the independence of the office and keeps it nonpartisan is the best way to do this.
But the DuPage County auditor expressed his concern in that if the board appoints the auditor, that's your employee now. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're our employee because they become a county officer. They're appointed in the same way that we appoint a county highway engineer or a supervisor of assessments. No one's proposing that, roads are very important. No one's saying, gosh, we should vote on who the highway engineer is. Because you know what? We want someone with an engineering background who's able to carry out those duties. In this case, we want someone who has the financial credentials to carry out the professional auditing.
You heard from the DuPage County auditor, he said you would no longer have a neutral arbiter if you appoint.
Well, and that's easy for Mr. Grogan because he comes from DuPage County where everyone's a Republican. Here in Peoria County, we have Democrats and Republicans on the board and in our various offices. I think it's important that not only do we work together, but that we have an auditor who is not elected as either a Democrat or a Republican, someone who's nonpartisan and professional.
The question of money. at the
It
auditor's
always comes
office.
down to money.
Carol Van Winkle, the previous auditor before the Kent Rotherham right now is the temporary one, said she quit because the board had cut about 5 years ago from 3 to 2 and then more recently from 2 to 1 full-time staff people in the auditor's office. What is required to run the auditor's office professionally? And will you be prepared as a board to fund it to that level?
I think that you always have a question of priorities in an organization. I think the difference between where the office is at right now at about $175,000 and where we were a year or two ago at more like $250,000 is not very much. I think we can find that for a professional auditor. In either case, you're talking about something that's less than 0.2% of our budget. One of the things that's important to note, though, is right now, the board can always go back and cut. We could go to no employees. If this passes, the ordinance that we have on the table says that not only would the board not be able to change the salary of this auditor, we would not be able to reduce the budget. So there would not be able to be political gamesmanship with budgets or salaries. They would be able to have the independence to look where they need to without worrying about the board coming back the next year and cutting their budget.
Real quickly, you have two forums if people want to learn more about this. They are?
Up in Mossville on March the
12th?
The 12th, and then again, and that's going to be hosted by Jim Fennell, a Republican County Board member, and then on the 15th at St. Philomena's Church. I will be hosting that. We didn't mention this, but I'm a Democrat. As you can see with both Mr. Fennell and myself, this is a proposal that has broad bipartisan support on the board.
And with that, we say thank you to Alan Mayer for the update on the auditor situation. Whether elected or appointed, December 1st is when that position will become effective. If you see on the ballot people running for office, that is indeed the case. If the referendum fails, those candidates will be on the November ballot. We ask you to go to the ballot polls on March 20th. And we'll be back with another question involving tax increases in the city of Canton in just a moment. I'm joined now by the Mayor of Canton, Kent McDowell. Welcome to the program, Kent.
Thank you, sir.
And residents of Canton will face a question on the March 20th ballot asking if the sales tax should be increased. It will be increased by a 0.5 cent or 0.5%. And the question is, shall the corporate authorities of the City of Canton be authorized to levy a tax at a rate of 1% for expenditures on municipal operations, expenditures on public infrastructure, or property tax relief? When we say a tax of 1%, the question doesn't even say sales tax, but it is a sales tax. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's going from what to what?
It would go from 0.5 to 1%. And it says on the ballot 1%. We're not raising it to 1%. We're just asking for another 0.5 cent, which would then, the total would be 1%.
And the total sales tax, including the state and county and city, would be?
It would go from 8.25 to 8.75.
Now, also on the question, it says that it could be used on municipal operations, public infrastructure, or property tax relief.
Correct.
Is property tax relief a possibility?
Absolutely. I campaigned with the knowledge, with the mindset that I wanted to curb as much as possible the continual increase of property taxes. I believe that those taxes are overused, and I wanted to find another way to generate some income without burdening property owners. And I always am cautious about saying that the sales tax is a fairer tax. I don't know that any tax is fair. It's hard to convince people that taxing is good, but I believe in this instance that it's fairer for a sales tax than it is a property tax, in that people who come to Canton, not necessarily reside in Canton, but people who buy goods and products in Canton would also contribute to the infrastructure and the basic services like police and fire. And people say to me, well, how is that fair? And if somebody would come into Canton and be involved in an accident, they're using police and EMS services, and so they would help contribute to helping pay for that.
Now, the question is slightly on the obtuse side, if I may say that. You didn't decide on the wording of this question, did you?
No, sir.
So-
That's the legalities of our state law and the structure of it.
Let's get down to the background to this, because you are asking for a sales tax increase. Why is a sales tax increase necessary in Canton?
We're looking at a deficit like all other communities as we go into our budget process at this time. And in order to, stave that deficit off, or, at least come to a budget that's balanced, we're going to have to find some more income. And again, going back to my belief is not putting the burden on the property owners. I asked the council to vote for a referendum, to put a referendum on a sales tax, hoping that we could, generate some more money and not be in a deficit.
And what's causing the financial problems for the city?
Well, there's a lot of things. Pension is probably number one. Personnel cost, I believe in Canton alone, is like 79% of the budget. And I believe any municipality or any county government, any of those are still, I think that's the bulk of most all their budgets is personnel. Of course you've got, pay raises, you've got insurance cost, and then you have pensions. And with these state mandated pension costs, it's hitting everybody pretty hard. The other thing that we face, and it's a reality of society as a whole, is that we're not getting the retail customers per se, the walk-in retail, brick and mortar type businesses are suffering because of the internet. And the state has been slow about closing that gap on, going after sales tax on internet purchases.
If the sales tax is approved by voters, how much money will it raise in a given fiscal year?
We anticipate, it just going back on past, it'd be approximately $600,000.
$600,000?
Yes.
And when will this sales tax go into effect, if it passes?
If it passes, it'll go into effect July 1, 2018.
And your fiscal year starts
May 1.
May 1, so you'll get maybe 3/4 of a year's of income in the first year of it.
In the first year, yes.
And if it doesn't pass, then what?
We got some hard decisions to make, some very hard decisions to make. Taxes and user fees are basically the only two sources of income the municipality has. So we would have to look at, increasing user fees, possibly. This administration has streamlined city government, and I'm continuing to do that. I've combined some positions. We've not hired back people or hired back, replace retirees, I should say, with full-time employees. We've been utilizing part-time help here and there, and trying to survive that way without having to pay all the pension and the insurance costs. And that's the downfall for the employee who works part-time, but it's a positive for the municipality to cut the personnel costs.
If the sales tax would go from the city's portion of the sales tax would go from 0.5% to 1%, are there exemptions to that?
There would be like titles, big purchases like vehicles, boats, things like that, medicines, and then some food sources, yes.
So it would be the same as it is now. The 0.5%
Correct.
has the same exemptions as the 1%.
That is correct, yes.
Is there an aspect of this that, what would you say to a citizen? If a citizen came up to you and said, Mayor McDowell, my budget's tight, why should I vote for this?
Well, my answer to that is, again, I appreciate that, and my answer would be, at some point, you're going to have to pay somewhere, somehow. I believe that this is a more controllable tax personally than the consumption tax, if you don't want to pay it, then you wouldn't consume as much. Property taxes, your head's in the guillotine. You know, you have to pay it. You know, and it rises as it rises. So my answer again would be, you know, you consume less, I guess.
And with that, we have run out of time. I thank you, Kent McDowell, the Mayor of Canton, and we appreciate your being here.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And we want to remind you that wherever you are, you should remember to vote on March 20th in the primary. Please join us again next week, when this time we'll turn to the question of school safety. It's on the minds of almost everybody across the country. We'll look at it locally on the next edition of At Issue.